Tamerlane the cripple who shook the world. In the endless steppes between Samarkand and the mountains of Fergana, on a stormy night when the heavens seemed to rage against the earth, a child was born, a child whose name would one day become a shadow of death across continents. His name was Timur, son of a man from the Barlas tribe. But even as a boy, he learned one truth: the world does not belong to the weak. In his youth, during a tribal battle, an arrow struck his leg. His bones shattered, but his spirit became unbreakable. From that day, they called him Timur the Lame, Tamerlane. But Timur himself would say, "I am not lame. It is the earth that trembles beneath my feet." With a mind sharp as his sword, and a heart cold as steel, Timur began uniting the scattered tribes of Transoxiana. Sometimes with promises, sometimes with deceit, and often with blood. He knew that to rule, the sword was not enough, you had to carve fear into the hearts of men. Timur saw himself as the heir of Genghis Khan, but unlike Genghis, who conquered through chaos, Timur built his empire through discipline, precision, and calculation. His army moved like a single organism. His battle formations, deadly as a chessboard, and he was the king who planned every move. He conquered Persia, Khorasan, and then turned toward the Caucasus and Anatolia. When he reached Baghdad, the clash of his swords echoed like the bells of death. The streets ran red with blood. And from the skulls of his enemies, he built towers whose shadows still linger in history. Yet Timur's thirst, for blood, for power, for immortality, could never be quenched. He looked southward toward India, the land of gold, elephants, and temples. With an army of 100,000 horsemen, Timur crossed the frozen passes and descended upon Delhi. Before him stood a vast army of war elephants, armored in steel. The ground shook, the beasts roared, and smoke rose into the sky. But Timur had conceived a plan born of madness. He ordered torches to be tied to the backs of camels and set them aflame. The terrified beasts ran screaming toward the elephants. Panic spread. The elephants turned back, crushing their own ranks. The mighty army of India collapsed, and Timur stood victorious. Delhi burned. Chroniclers wrote that day the sun turned the color of blood and the sky blackened with smoke. Yet amid the ruins, Timur dreamed not of destruction but of glory. He said, "I open the path to beauty through sword and blood." In Samarkand, he built palaces and minarets of impossible grandeur, marvels that still leave travelers breathless. But behind that beauty lurked horror. In every city he conquered, he left a trail of death. In Nishapur, thousands were buried alive. In Isfahan, the bloodshed was so great that historians wrote, the earth smelled of death for years. And yet, his enemies feared not only his cruelty, but his intellect. He turned war into politics and terror into order. In the final years of his life, Timur dreamed one last dream: to conquer China. From Samarkand, he gathered an army vast as the horizon, and marched eastward. But the winter was crueler than any enemy. Beside the icy river Sir Daria, fever took hold of him. In a silk tent, surrounded by maps that stretched across the world, Timur looked at his generals and whispered, "I have conquered the world but not myself." Days later, the man who had made empires tremble fell silent. His body was carried to Samarkand and laid in a grand mausoleum, the Guri Amir. But soon, a legend was born. They said whoever disturbed his rest would unleash fire upon the earth. Centuries later, in 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened his tomb. Upon the stone was carved, "Whoever disturbs my peace shall release an invader more terrible than I." 3 days later, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. And once again, the world was engulfed in flames. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps it was the wrath of Timur himself, watching from the dust of ages, proud, silent, and merciless. Tamerlane, the man who shook the world with one crippled leg, and made even death tremble at his name.